Welcome to the Media Navigators podcast, brought to you by the World Media Group. My name is Belinda Barker, and I'm the Chief Executive. Today, we're going to be talking about the events industry. In the UK alone, it's estimated to be worth £42 billion. Most marketeers have events within their portfolio for getting deeper engagement with both their clients and consumers. But COVID has completely changed the industry. The last 6 months, they've experienced exceptional change. Today's podcast is going to have a slightly different format than normal. We're going to turn, or at least reverse the roles a little bit. And we're having a guest co-host in the person of Jacob Howard. Jacob is the Vice President of Marketing for Deutsche Bank, and is also the chair of the Chartered Institute of Marketing's FS Group, Financial Services Group. He works organising a wide spectrum of marketing activities, but also organising events on behalf of Deutsche Bank, being involved as a sponsor or exhibitor of other events, and in fact has a large event that he's organising next week. So first of all, I'd just like to welcome you, Jacob. Are you well today? How are you coping?
Very good, Belinda, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this podcast. I'm happy to contribute.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jacob. And Jacob and I will be talking to Orson Francescone. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm sure you'll correct me, who is the Managing Director of FT Live at the Financial Times. Orson took on this role literally 3 months before the beginning of lockdown. The FT is an incredible brand with an enormous reputation in the events area. And I'm delighted to say they're also a member of the World Media Group. But as soon as he got his feet under the desk, the whole world changed and COVID hit. So that's going to be the main subject of what we're going to be talking about today. But first of all, I'd like to welcome Orson, who is currently in Italy. Not sure where in Italy, Milan, perhaps?
Hi, Belinda. I'm actually in Rome at the moment, and it's Orson Francescone, but please don't worry. I've lived with all my life with either Italians getting my first name wrong or people outside of Italy getting my Italian name wrong. So I'm used to it.
So how Orson, obviously Francescone, Italian. Orson comes from?
Well, Orson is actually originally a French name, but I'm half Irish, half Italian, and so I grew up in Rome, and then I went to university in Ireland, and then I landed in the UK. Around the 2005 mark, and I joined a company called Euromoney Institutional Investor, which is a financial publishing company, as an event content producer. And as most people who work in events, I fell into it completely by chance, not by design. And that's really how I started my journey into B2B events and running events for media owners.
So the FT role must have been a bit of a best job in a lifetime. Wow, I've landed this amazing role. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went around, turning around this business to into the virtual world, and also a little bit about the scale of the FT events business? How many people around the world are you working with?
Yes, so in answer to your first question, yes, the FT Live Managing Director role was very much a kind of a dream job, really. And I had started my career in the financial publishing business, and then I worked for other media owners, and then I got a call about 1.5 years ago now, and it was one of those calls that were really once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. And so very happy to join the FT at the end of November. And on the 17th of March this year was my 3-month kind of 90-day in anniversary, when I was due to present my strategy to the board. And that morning, I woke up with a raging fever with something that turned out to be COVID, if you can believe it or not. Anyway, luckily I didn't have a terribly aggressive form of it, but that strategy never got presented to the board. And then we went into lockdown. And essentially now, 6 months later, the face of the FT Live business is completely different to what it was 3 months ago. 6 months ago, sorry. And so that strategy is kind of gone completely out the window. And the only way I kind of can describe what we've been through is really, I just, as you know, just joined the FT, and my thought was very much, well, I'll be damned if I'm going to let this affect my new job. Really, I can't just let this kind of happen to me on my watch, and I've just joined my dream job. And so I very much remember thinking that the two strategic drivers were speed and chasing customer value. I knew that getting out quickly was going to be really, really important as a signal to our clients, but also internally to the FT. And just to give you an idea of the shape of the business, FT Live is a global business with around 100 people in the team, primarily based in London, but with offshoots in Hong Kong, New York, Singapore, Manila, and Tokyo. And so it's a truly global business, and we run, in a normal year, over 200 events, from conferences, primarily B2B conferences. We run a couple of consumer festivals, and also we have a client-tailored event business where we run bespoke events for some of our clients. So that'll give you an idea of our business. And up until March or April, these were all physical events running 5-star hotels or convention centers. And so when we went into lockdown, I remember this feeling of, well, we can't just let events kind of dictate to us, and we must react quickly. And the first thing we did was we launched something very simple, which is called a webinar. And as you know, webinars have been around for many, many years. And we launched it we turned it around in 4 days' time. And we ended up with 8,000 people registering for this webinar. And that was a real light bulb moment for us. We hadn't forecasted any numbers, but I think if anyone had asked me how many people would register on that, I probably would have said in the hundreds. And so when we saw 8,000 people registering for this, we were like, crikey, this is a lot bigger than we ever expected. And so that got us thinking of, well, could we do something slightly bigger and bolder? And so that's when we launched this concept of the Global Boardroom Conference. And so the Global Boardroom really was a very ambitious project. It was a 3-day event with about 120 speakers globally addressing the crisis that we were going through. And we launched that in April, and we delivered it in March. And that was probably one of the craziest event projects I have ever worked on, because if anyone can imagine a conference with 120 speakers, you will all know that these kind of size of projects usually take a 12 to 24 month lead time. And we produced this in about 4 weeks, and we ended up with over 50,000 people registering for this event.
I was going to say, I've heard of that one, Orson. It really did go around the industry as a completely new and huge deal. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. And the biggest issue that we had to grapple with, which I'm sure people are going to resonate with, is the technology aspect. And so here's a team that is very adept at delivering high-level conferences and exhibitions in physical format, and suddenly we're thrust into having to deliver something in a digital format, which we had never had to do. And as we all know, the event technology space is complex, complicated, fragmented, and nothing that is out there was built with COVID in mind. And so any tech products out in the market were always built with the idea that these were kind of ancillary products to tag onto physical events. And nothing was built with a digital first or digital only mindset. And so grappling with the technology has been one of the toughest things we've had to do. And to cut a long story short, I can tell you that the night before the Global Boardroom event, I got a message from our technology director saying that we had been hacked and that our Zoom speaker links, invite links, had been leaked on the dark web. And I obviously thought that he was joking, because this was the night before the event. And of course he wasn't joking. He wasn't joking. And so, can you imagine? And so the dark web is just terrifying. And so there was somebody selling the links to the speaker links to the Global Boardroom on the dark web. Just incredible. And so we had to change everything overnight. And then we had and so that was kind of a really weird kind of thing. And then we had a more, what I call traditional cyber attack, where again the night before, where somebody tried to bring down our servers, and so our event website. Listen, the reality is sometimes the FT, because of, I guess, our stance on free press and independent thought, there are some people around the world that aren't our biggest fans. And so anyway, luckily our cybersecurity team were able to deal with that. And eventually on the day, the event ran very smoothly. What we did notice, though, is that the people's behaviors online are completely different. And so our numbers of registrations doubled on the first day. So we went into day one of the Global Boardroom with about 25,000 people registered. And by the end of the 3 days, we'd had 52,000 people who had registered for the event. And so again, these are kind of numbers we just weren't used to. Kind of head-spinning numbers. If you're, I've worked in large-scale exhibitions, and those are the kind of numbers you get on large-scale exhibitions. But these are events that take years and years and years to build, and suddenly you build something in 4 weeks, and you get this incredible momentum. And so that was probably the biggest kind of catalyst for us, Belinda and Jacob, that kind of told us that there was something in this that we could confidently turn all of our business around into what is now 100% digital events business.
So I had a question. You were saying about the kind of global scope of your team. Did you find during the COVID crisis that different regions were more willing to go virtual sooner, or not?
That's a really good question, Jacob. I guess I'd never thought of it that way. I suspect, the beauty of digital, of course, which we didn't have in the physical presence, is that suddenly an event's geolocation kind of didn't make any sense or didn't exist anymore, right? And suddenly, we were used to a world where we were constrained by the physical location of an event, and we were constrained by the size of a venue. And suddenly we have this business model where we have infinite inventory that we can sell. So we can sell as many tickets as we like, at close to zero marginal cost, because adding an extra virtual delegate costs us close to nothing. And we can reach every corner of the world. And that is kind of one of the biggest, there are lots of downsides. There are lots of negatives of not being able to run physical events. But there are also lots of positives. And so the thought of having a product that every person in the world could access if they wanted to is a really compelling product. And so in terms of demand from different regions, I guess, we've seen most of our business, Jacob, is based UK, Europe, and USA. And so I guess in the numbers we saw, those were they followed the usual patterns in terms of where most of our subscribers are based. And Asia as well, obviously, and so I don't think we could draw any inferences in terms of appetite for going digital. Because remember, up until recently, in fact, even now, most of the world just doesn't have a choice, right? So it's not as if people can choose between physical and digital, and so really there is only one choice at the moment.
Do you? So people engage differently to virtual events than they do to real ones. We've experienced, the World Media Group, I'm not trying to compare our events to yours. We're very small and very niche, we certainly at the beginning experienced far greater numbers attending our events and on a much broader geography. People from Paraguay. I mean, God knows who it was from Paraguay, but it sticks in my head as something that I remember. But how are you finding that engagement experience? And also, I mean, you talked a bit earlier about, I mean, that amazing job, how you managed to get 120 speakers all lined up. I mean, I'm finding that the content that we're creating has to be even better curated than a live event. Has to be really, really spot on, or you lose people very quickly. So they're tending to be slightly shorter. And yeah, I'm certainly struggling with how to get more interaction going. Making sure that people feel involved and getting that flow going. What are your top tips?
Yeah, so I mean, these are all really good points. So the way I kind of see this is, imagine that there's a big earthquake that happens, and March and COVID and the lockdown was the big earthquake, and then it's followed by lots of little aftershocks, really, and it takes time for the dust to settle. And so, I'm pretty sure that the models and the formats that we saw, that we're seeing now, or we saw over the past 6 months, are going to be very different in the next year and a half. And so, as customer behavior changes and modifies, you will see different event formats and different event types. So, for example, the way people tend to book on digital events is very different to the way they tend to book on live events, right? And so on live events, people need to block out their diaries, they need to take into account travel, they need to book a hotel. And so that buying decision gets made, usually weeks in advance. Unfortunately, in the digital world, I say unfortunately because it's not good for our blood pressure and our heart rate, people can make very, very last minute decisions, right? And so you can literally make a decision to attend a virtual event from your bed on the morning of the event, depending on how you feel or how your diary is looking. And that is, it's great for consumers because it gives them lots of choice and options. Not great for event organizers because it's incredibly difficult to forecast numbers. And so up until the very last minute, as I mentioned, our numbers doubled on the Global Boardroom over the course of 2 days, really. And so the buying behavior is very different. So that's one thing we need to take into account. And so planning is really hard for us, or trying to have an idea of how many people are going to attend. Obviously, the way people interact is completely different to live events. And so we know that, by and large, people's attention spans are quite short. And so, some of our events last for 2 or 3 days. Well, there's no question of us even thinking that anyone would sit at their laptop and watch an event for 3 days straight. And, if you think of the physical world, you know that the same doesn't happen either. You go to a conference and you might go in for the first session, then you pop out for a coffee, then you go into a meeting room, then you go for lunch. And so those interactions are all gone and they're close to impossible to replicate. And so really the expectation that people would sit in front of a laptop for days on end, unfortunately, is just not realistic. And so I think everyone needs to accept the fact that people will dip in and out, they will have a lot more choice, and they will dip in and out and only attend the events that are really important and crucial for their business, and B, only listen to the content that is really, really, really important for their day-to-day survival through the crisis. And so these are the kind of things we are observing. And so I think setting yourselves expectations is really important. Don't expect everyone to watch the entirety of an event program because it's just not realistic. In terms of tips, yes, I mean, listen, shorter is better. Big, large panels just aren't going to work very easily in a digital format. So we recommend no more than 3 people on a panel. And then really trying to provide some sort of interactivity through your event portal. And this is something we could spend days talking about, different event platforms. But, replicating that networking or that serendipitous moment is really, really hard online. So the way you used to bump into each other in a hotel corridor over a coffee is very hard to replicate online. And so that is the kind of thing everyone is struggling with at the moment.
Without giving away any financial secrets, how are you finding getting delegates to pay for things, and also, are sponsors still engaging with events? We all, at the end of the day, we all need to make money somehow.
Yeah, really, really good question. So, our revenue mix in normal days, in normal years, is a mix of sponsorship and delegate revenue. By and large, our sponsorship revenue has held up very well. And listen, I think that is a function, first and foremost, of our brand. I'm very lucky to be running an event business as one of the most formidable and well-respected brands in the world. And that the reality is that just helps a lot. Also, with regards to sponsorship, those revenues are holding up well because, as mentioned before, we are providing much, much bigger audiences. And so instead of 150 people at the Four Seasons in Park Lane, I'm able to deliver 2,000-3,000 people on any event that we are running digitally. And so suddenly, the eyes on that event are just much bigger than they were in the physical world. And thirdly, depending on the event technology you're using, you can provide quite a lot of insight and analytics with regards to who are your delegates attending. So sponsors value those three things quite a lot. Now, when it comes to delegate revenue, it is a lot harder. And so, usually in the B2B conference world, you're talking about anything from $800 to $4,000 to attend a B2B conference, depends on the market, industry, and type. Well, those rates are just not realistic online. And so we are, I guess we're kind of very much adapting an agile framework with regards to delegate revenue, and we are testing and trialing lots of different models. And so we are testing different price points. We are testing different formats. So you will notice on the Global Boardroom Mark II, so off the success of the first Global Boardroom, we are running our second Global Boardroom in November, the week after the US election. Well, this time around, we have a freemium model where it is still free to watch the event from a live point of view. And then we have two other paid ticket options. One, which will give you access to the VOD, video on demand, for 90 days post-event. And that's priced around the $60 mark. And that really is a kind of a convenience ticket, right? So you're not going to be able to watch the whole Global Boardroom because it's 3 days of content with hundreds of speakers. And for $60, you can watch that over 90 days. And then we have what we call kind of a B2B professional pass, which is priced around the $400 mark. And that gives you access to some closed door sessions with some of our journalists. So, feedback we constantly get is that people want more access and closer access with our journalists, and so they can have that. And then also access to the networking function. And so we are actually adopting lots of different pricing models on different events. And we're just kind of watching and seeing what's happening, really. And, this is pioneering territory for everyone, and no one's done it before. And so all you can do is test and test and test, really, until the dust settles with those aftershocks. And so we're relatively relaxed. And so certainly those delegate rates that we used to command in the physical environment are just not realistic. But what we are seeing, and so at the recent FT Weekend Festival, I think we sold over 4,000 tickets, and I mean these were priced at a B2C price of around £40. And so we know that people will pay for really good content. The question is how much they'll pay and when they will pay. And so these are things that we're experimenting with. And so I guess there isn't an definitive answer on that, and we're relatively comfortable with that.
Actually, Orson, that chimes with what I'm seeing in my work at Deutsche Bank. A lot of the conferences that I would normally sponsor, as you said, everyone was kind of scrambling in this new world we find ourselves in. And I think the ones that didn't do it right just tried to copy it exactly as they'd done it before, but now say it's online and it's exactly the same ticket price. and it's exactly the same sponsor price. And of course, I think all of the sponsors kind of reacted to that because, the salespeople that I get these events ready for, they're not used to this, moving onto this virtual world. And I think generally we haven't seen a great deal of value for the average salesperson that would normally be able to shake a few hands and have a coffee and, really do some good networking. So I think eventually a number of these events chose to make the delegate passes free. But as you said, you get access to a larger group of delegates, and hopefully, if you do it right, as you said, some better analytics.
Yeah, listen, what we're experimenting with, Jacob, and again, we're very much in experimentation mode, which I find very exciting. And obviously, it can be hard on the team because the team has been used to delivering a product and doing it very well, and suddenly we're thrown into a world where we're experimenting with all sorts of models and formats. But what seems to be working quite well is on, say, our kind of traditional conference, then we have bespoke breakout rooms or what we call roundtables. And so a sponsor will have a carefully selected group of maybe maximum 10 to 12 potential clients in a private breakout room. And that seems to be proving quite popular because it's still informal, but you also, just from an event tech point of view, you actually get to see people's faces, a bit like the traditional Zoom or Google Meet call. And you get to spend quite a lot of quality time with it. So we're trying to provide products with different sorts of levels. So, some sponsors still want the big numbers. So they want that kind of brand alignment, and they want that big branding opportunity. And then the same sponsors, when maybe someone else in the organization, a different division, wants a business development opportunity, right? So the CMO will want to align his brand with the global boardroom because it's this amazing event that the FTs launch. But at the same time, a managing director of one of your banking divisions needs leads to sell his product, right? And so I think you can accomplish that either on the same events or in separate events. And so really creating, bespoke packages. I say to my team, the rule book has gone completely out the window, right? So when it comes to pricing, packages, formats, everything is now on the table, which again is exciting, but sometimes is also unsettling. But, ultimately the two guiding principles have to be chasing customer value. So there's no point producing anything that customers don't value. And speed is still one of my big strategic drivers. And so moving very fast is really important because we know the preferences change, the technology is constantly changing. And so we just have to be on top of it to be out in the market. But, customer value has to be the other driver. And so if the feedback is that people don't want to pay or prefer a different format, then you're just going to have to roll with the punches, I'm afraid. And that's just the way the world we're living in at the moment.
So by the sounds of what you're saying, virtual has been successful for you. But I imagine that when hopefully normal, whatever that normal is, no normal, new normal, anyway, when we're not locked down anymore, you can imagine that there will be some live events. Do you think that you will still have, the balance will still be more virtual to live? Or do you think it may end up being that virtual will be supplementary to live?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question, Belinda. So, just an answer to your first question, maybe we're lucky, maybe we're at the right place at the right time. We've had a great year considering. We have, between now and Christmas, we have about 180 events to deliver now. Some of these are small webinars, some of them are roundtables, other are 3 big shindigs with 150 speakers. And so we have an unbelievably busy autumn. And I think today we ran 6 events and we've got 7 tomorrow. And so it's very, very busy, slightly nerve-wracking, but it's a great feeling to be able to suddenly get back in the game, I guess. And, we've been planning for this throughout the summer. Now, with regards to what's going to happen once hopefully soon COVID is over or there's an answer to COVID. I mean, listen, the reality is in terms of what we're planning for, we are planning for 2021 to have, again, another year with 100% digital events. And listen, these things are very hard to call, as you know. But when you have to plan in advance, and we're beginning our budgeting process, we would rather be prudent. And so we're planning for 100% digital calendar. And if and when the conditions were to return sooner than we expected, then we're very capable of switching that live event tap on very easily. We've been doing that for years and years and years. And so the beauty of having set up a digital event business is that we can very easily switch back to live and digital as and when the conditions come. But, I suspect that the conditions for large physical events are still probably a year and a half, 2 years away. And so that's what we're planning for. In terms of what it'll look like when we come back, the hybrid word is the probably one of the most commonly used words now in the events industry. But we have a small working group internally to try and define what does hybrid mean and what does hybrid look. And so the one thing we are quite clear about is that digital now is never going away, Belinda, because that global reach that digital has given us is just a pretty phenomenal development. And so even when we do go back to the physical world, and so the way I envisage live events to come back is that they will be a relatively localized affair. So I think the days of the large international cross-border transnational events are many years away from now, because even if the conditions, public health conditions return, we know that travel budgets will be locked down, and most importantly, people's behaviors will have changed, and they will have realized that they can do a lot of business online without having to get on a plane. And so I think physical events will be a relatively localized affair, probably smaller and more intimate. But all of the events, we are now planning that as and when physical events come back, all of the events will have the digital component. So essentially, they will be a mix of speakers that are physically based in whatever venue we used. But a lot of speakers, I suspect, will continue to be zoomed in remotely. And then we will continue to broadcast out from that physical environment to the rest of the world. And really, why wouldn't you really? When you've got that opportunity to really reach wider audiences, then it'd be crazy to go back to a world when you didn't have that. And so that's the way we're planning for the physical return. We also think the physical return will come back slowly, and certainly we will start with things like, we might run a big global digital event and then run a drinks reception maybe in a couple of locations at the end of the day for some local business people that do want to get together. We might start testing running dinners, small intimate dinners post digital events, and so at the end of the day there may be a intimate dinner between small numbers. And so that I think that's how we're going to come back. Eventually you like to think that some large events will come back, but I think it's quite a long way away.
I was rather hoping for the second half of next year that I might just manage to get a few smaller events in, but
yeah, I think that's what we're hoping, that in the second half of next year perhaps we might run some drink receptions or dinners. And as I said, listen, the reality is chase customer value and customer demand. If people come banging on our door saying we're desperate for live events, well, we don't have a problem doing that. We can do those in our sleep, right? But I think in terms of budgeting and planning, we need to be cautious, and so we are planning for a 100% digital year next year.
That makes sense to me. Awesome. I like how you put it as kind of the difference between a global event and a local event. So there's an event that I'm planning for next week is Cybos, and Deutsche Bank's one of the main sponsors of the Cybos event. Now that's an event a bit like the Olympics, that it goes to a different city every year and everyone flies in from everywhere around the world. But of course, that's just not a safe thing to do now. It's meant to be in Singapore next year. And I wonder, I mean, we all don't know yet, but I wonder if they do what you've described as a small Singapore event for Singapore-based people, with then a global, because they've had to go digital, obviously, for next week. So maybe in some, looking at this glass half full, is that people are now ramping up to run these large global digital events. So it should be something that you can do as an addition to your local event. Yes, and I know Sibos very well, and I used to attend it in my years when I was working at Euromoney. I remember being jealous, thinking, gosh, I wonder if I'll be running one of these kinds of events one day, right? I then went on to run some very, very large events in the oil and gas industry, but certainly Sibos was one of those iconic events in the banking and finance industry, which were just incredible, right? And so they work on this, as you know, this east-west pattern. And so one year they're in east of the world, and the other year they're in the rest of the world. And this is a real example of a truly global transnational event where people fly in from all over the world. And unfortunately for our friends at Sibos, I suspect that model is damaged. I don't know if forever, but certainly for the next year or two, I suspect that model will take a big hit, because I just cannot see. And I think they used to get something like 20,000 people. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, but those are the kind of numbers. And I just can't see 20,000 bankers getting on a plane and flying to Singapore to go to an event next year. And so I suspect you're right. I suspect the physical component will be a very localized affair, potentially Pan-Asian, depending on the conditions, maybe. But I think the big days of big things like the GSMA, the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, big landmark events like Sibos, they will come back, but it'll take a long time for them to come back to the way they were before. And I suspect they will never be the way they were before. And as I've just said, that digital component, which by the way will be an opportunity for them as well, I suspect that will be there forever. And so people's behaviors change in big crises and in big dislocations like this ones we have, and they don't always go back to where they were before.
I'm really sad that unfortunately we need to kind of pull this podcast to an end. I would like to ask you just one last quick question, Orson. When you recovered from COVID, is there one single best decision that you've made during the last 4 or 5 months?
Oh, I think, but without a doubt, it was the global boardroom. I remember after that initial webinar that I mentioned earlier on with 6,000 people, I remember our CEO, John Ridding, saying, well, that was great, but can we do something a bit bigger and bolder with more speakers? Because, the webinar had 3 speakers. And I said, yeah, I'm sure we could do something big. And he said, well, how big can it be? I said, well, we can get speakers from all over the world. And he said, well, that sounds great. And how quickly can you do it? And I think I said 4 weeks. And as soon as I said 4 weeks, I remember regretting it. And of course, I guess I was trying to impress my new boss. But I vividly remember thinking, why on earth did you say 4 weeks? Because, you've never done this before. How on earth are we going to do it? I can tell you it's probably the most exhilarating experience of my life. Also terrifying and scary. But without that was a real moment that kind of gave us lots of confidence and really shifted our thinking from digital being just something that will allow us to survive and not die, to digital being a massive, huge opportunity. And so that was by far the best thing I did.
That's amazing. Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining me on this podcast. And Jacob, I look forward to working more with you on the Financial Marketing Leaders Summit. Just to give it a little plug, December 2nd, if anyone's out there is interested. Yes, just thank you both so much. It's been really, really interesting.
Thank you. And don't miss the Global Boardroom 2 in November.
We won't. We'll put it on the website so people can find it.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you, Jacob. Best of luck with your event next week.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.